Tchcdantthtar, there is a specific kind of silence that happens right after your life breaks into pieces. It isn't the quiet of a peaceful room, or the soft stillness of the late night. It is a heavy, suffocating silence where you can hear your own heart beating like a hammer inside your chest, while everything you ever believed in vanishes into thin air. I learned the true sound of that silence on a freezing rainy Tuesday evening in November. My name is Hannah. For 6 years, I believed I was living a simple, honest, and happy life. I was married to Mark, a handsome, ambitious man who worked as a senior project manager for a major real estate firm in the city. Mark was charming, well-spoken, and driven. His family, his mother, Eleanor, and his younger sister, Chloe, lived in a grand, high-end neighborhood on the outer edge of the city. They were people who cared deeply about appearances. To Eleanor, your worth as a human being was measured entirely by the brand of car you drove, the neighborhood you lived in, and the name printed on your business card. I, on the other hand, came from a very modest background. My late father had been a quiet, hardworking man who spent 40 years working as an archivist and land researcher for the city's historical records department. He didn't leave behind millions of dollars or shiny luxury sports cars. What he left me was an appreciation for truth, an eye for detail, and a worn leather notebook filled with historical land registries, family trees, and old municipal maps. Because I didn't come from money, Mark's mother treated me like an unwelcome guest in her son's life. To Eleanor, I was the unfortunate mistake Mark had made before he truly understood how far his ambition could take him. She never missed an opportunity to remind me where I stood, whether it was making sharp comments about my simple clothes, ignoring me at family dinners, or assigning me household chores whenever I visited her mansion. Eleanor made sure I felt small. I tolerated all of it. I stayed quiet, I smiled politely, and I served them tea with soft, respectful words. I did it because I loved Mark. I believed that as long as my husband stood by my side, his mother's cruelty was just a small price to pay for our family's peace. I was a fool. The nightmare began on that rainy Tuesday. I was driving home from the local library where I worked part-time. The rain was falling in thick, blinding sheets, making the asphalt glisten under the orange glow of the streetlights. As I tapped my brakes near a busy intersection, a heavy commercial delivery truck slid on the slick road, blowing straight through a red light. The impact was deafening. Metal crumpled like paper, glass shattered into thousands of tiny diamond-like pieces, and my world flipped upside down. When I opened my eyes hours later, the air smelled sharply of rubbing alcohol and antiseptic. The harsh fluorescence of hospital lights burned my eyes. My body was wrapped in bandages. My right arm was immobilized in a heavy plaster cast, and a throbbing pain pounded behind my forehead. A nurse stepped into the room, holding a clipboard. When she saw that I was awake, her face softened with deep empathy. "Mrs. Hannah," she asked gently, "you've had a severe accident. You have a broken wrist, 2 cracked ribs, and a minor concussion. But you are very lucky to be alive. My husband," I managed to whisper, my throat dry and raspy, "is Mark here?" The nurse hesitated. She looked down at her clipboard, then back at me with an uncomfortable look. "We called your husband's emergency contact number 3 times, she said quietly. A woman answered the phone on the second call. She said your husband was busy at a dinner party and couldn't be interrupted for minor issues. We left a message with the hospital address. Her words felt like a physical slap across my face. A minor issue. I pressed my lips together, refusing to let tears fall in front of a stranger. I asked the nurse for my handbag, pulled out my phone with my left hand, and dialed Mark's number. It rang 4 times before going straight to voicemail. I tried again. On the 5th attempt, the line picked up. Background noise poured through the speaker, soft classical music, the clinking of expensive crystal glasses, and the low hum of cheerful laughter. "Hannah." Mark's voice sounded impatient, heavy with wine. "Why are you calling me 5 times in a row? I'm at my mother's house celebrating the new commercial venture." "Mark." My voice trembled despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I had a car accident. I'm in the emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital. My wrist is broken, and..." Before I could finish my sentence, I heard a sharp snort of laughter over the line. It wasn't Mark. It was his sister Chloe, who was obviously standing right beside him with the speakerphone turned on. "Oh, please, Mark." Eleanor's loud, grating voice echoed in the background, accompanied by the clinking of silverware. "Tell her to stop being so dramatic. She probably bumped her bumper in a parking lot and wants you to pay her repair bill." Tell her we are hosting the VP of Sterling Capital tonight. We don't have time for her little pity parties. Hannah, look. Mark sighed into the receiver, his tone cold, flat, and devoid of a single drop of concern. My mother is right. Tonight is the biggest night of my career. Mr. Sterling is here to finalize the funding for our new commercial plaza project. I can't just walk away to hold your hand over a minor scratch. Take a taxi home. We'll talk tomorrow. Mark, please? I whispered, a tear finally escaping my eye and slipping into my hair. I'm hurt. I'm alone. Stop making a scene, Hannah. Mark snapped coldly. You always find a way to ruin important moments for my family. Just take an Uber and go to sleep. The line went dead. In the background right before the call disconnected, I heard Eleanor and Chloe bursting into loud, collective laughter. They weren't just ignoring my pain, they were entertained by it. To them, my suffering was nothing more than an inconvenient joke, an annoying distraction from their grand life. I sat in that cold hospital bed, staring at the black screen of my phone. The physical pain in my ribs was nothing compared to the icy realization settling inside my chest. The man I had spent 6 years supporting, the family I had served with quiet respect, they didn't just dislike me, they held absolute contempt for me. They viewed me as a disposable object, a temporary inconvenience to be swept aside the moment real money and status stepped into the room. I didn't cry again that night. As the hours dragged on and the hospital room grew cold, the sadness inside me hardened into something dark, sharp, and solid. I looked down at my bandaged arm, then at the reflection of my tired, bruised face in the dark glass of the window. They had laughed at my pain. They had turned their backs on me while I was bleeding on a hospital gurney. They believed I was weak because I was quiet. They believed I was helpless because I didn't boast about wealth. What Mark and his family didn't know was that quiet people spend a lot of time observing. And while they were busy planning their bright, wealthy future on the foundation of my humiliation, they had no idea that I was holding the one key that could destroy their entire world. Teach unanimous Betrayal. I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later. The doctor gave me a bottle of painkillers, strict instructions to rest, and a warning not to lift anything heavy with my right hand. I took a cab back to our suburban home, pushing the door open into a quiet, cold house. Mark wasn't there. There were no flowers, no note on the kitchen counter, no soup in the fridge. The coffee machine was left dirty, and a pile of Mark's dry cleaning was thrown onto the living room sofa. He didn't come home until late Thursday evening. I was sitting in the dark living room, resting my head against the back of the armchair, when the front door unlocked. Mark walked in, wearing his tailored dark suit, loosening his silk tie. When he flipped on the light and saw me sitting there in my cast and bandages, he didn't run over to hug me. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He stood near the entryway, letting out an annoyed sigh. "You're still wearing that cast?" he asked, throwing his keys onto the glass coffee table. "You look terrible, Hannah. My mother invited us over for dinner tomorrow night to celebrate the official signing of the Sterling Capital loan. I hope you're planning on cleaning yourself up. I can't have you looking like a victim in front of my investors." I looked at my husband. I searched his face for any sign of the man I used to love, the man who once promised to protect me, the man who used to hold my hand when I was anxious. There was nothing left. His eyes were cold, filled with an ugly, greedy ambition that consumed everything good inside him. "You left me in an emergency room, Mark," I said, my voice low and flat. "I could have had internal bleeding. I could have died." Mark rolled his eyes, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, don't start with the emotional guilt trip, Hannah. You're fine. You're sitting right here, aren't you? The doctors took care of you. Why do you always have to make everything about yourself? My company is about to secure a $30 million development deal for the Oak Ridge Commercial Plaza. This project will make me a full partner in the firm. My family has worked for months to secure this deal with Mr. Sterling. I didn't have time to sit in a waiting room for 5 hours over a minor sprain." "It wasn't a sprain, Mark. My wrist is broken in 2 places." "Whatever," Mark snapped, crossing his arms. "The point is, tomorrow night is critical. Mr. Sterling's daughter, Victoria, is coming to the dinner. My mother wants everything to be perfect. So if you're going to come, keep your complaints to yourself and put on something nice. Better yet, just stay in the kitchen and help my mother's catering staff serve the food. That way you won't embarrass me with awkward conversation. Stay in the kitchen and serve the food." He was telling his own wife to act as a servant at a family dinner party, simply because he was ashamed of my injuries and my modest background in front of his wealthy potential partners. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, I simply nodded. I understand, Mark. Good, he said, turning around and walking toward his home office. I have work to do. Don't disturb me. The next evening, I wore a simple black high-neck dress that covered the bandages on my neck, keeping my cast tucked close to my side. We drove in silence to Eleanor's massive estate in the hills. When we arrived, the long driveway was lined with high-end luxury vehicles. Warm yellow light poured from the floor to ceiling windows of the mansion, and the faint sound of live violin music drifted into the night air. Inside, the house was stunningly decorated. Catering staff in crisp white uniforms carried silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate appetizers. In the center of the grand living room stood Eleanor, dressed in a sparkling emerald gown, holding court with a group of wealthy guests. Beside her stood Chloe, laughing loudly, and a young woman dressed in an expensive designer dress. Victoria Sterling, the daughter of the primary investor. When Eleanor saw Mark and me enter, her smile flickered for a fraction of a second before turning into a cold, artificial glare. She didn't greet me. She walked straight over to Mark, wrapping her arms around him. Mark, darling, you look wonderful, Eleanor gushed. Then, she glanced at me with disgust, her eyes lingering on my cast. Hannah, I see you decided to come despite your condition. Try not to drag your feet, dear, and please, stay away from the main lounge. Mr. Sterling is an important man. We don't want him thinking our family is surrounded by drama. I'll stay out of the way, Eleanor, I said quietly. See that you do. Chloe chimed in, taking a sip of champagne. Victoria was just telling us about her father's plans for the Oak Ridge project. It's going to be the biggest luxury retail hub in the state. Mark is going to be famous. I walked quietly toward the back conservatory, away from the crowd. The conservatory was a glass-walled garden room overlooking the dark back lawn. It was quiet, secluded and empty. I stepped behind a large potted palm tree, leaning against the cold glass to rest my aching ribs. A few minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the conservatory opened. I was about to step out, but the voices that followed made me freeze completely in the shadows. It was Mark and his mother, Eleanor. Are you sure the papers are ready, Mark? Eleanor asked, her voice hushed but sharp with urgency. Yes, mother, Mark replied. I heard the sound of a zipper, followed by the rustle of heavy paper documents. I have the entire asset declaration package right here. Once Mr. Sterling signs the financing agreement tonight, Advance Construction will officially take control of the Oak Ridge land. And what about Hannah? Eleanor's tone turned icy and cruel. When are you going to get rid of that useless girl? She's a weight around your neck, Mark. She brings nothing to this family. No money, no status, no connections. Victoria Sterling is clearly interested in you. Her father practically told me tonight that if you were a free man, he would love to welcome you into the Sterling family. I held my breath, my heart pounding violently against my cracked ribs. I waited for Mark to defend me. I waited for him to tell his mother that he loved me, that I was his wife, that he would never betray our marriage. Instead, Mark let out a cold, amused chuckle. Don't worry, mother, Mark said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The moment the Oak Ridge land transfer is finalized and the Sterling funds hit our corporate account, I'm filing for divorce. Good. Eleanor laughed softly. And what about her financial claims? She's been married to you for 6 years. She won't get a dime. Mark sneered. My lawyer drafted a settlement agreement. Since she doesn't have the money to hire a real legal team, I'll offer her a tiny lump sum, maybe $30,000, and threaten to tie her up in court for years if she refuses. She's soft, mother. She's weak and uneducated. She'll take the 30 grand, cry a little, and disappear quietly. She has no idea what's coming. That's my boy, Eleanor said proudly, patting his arm. She was always a nobody. It's time you stepped into the world where you truly belong. They walked out of the conservatory, their quiet laughter echoing off the glass walls before the heavy doors clicked shut behind them. I stood behind the palm tree in the dark, my body trembling. Not from sadness, but from a rage so pure, so absolute, that it burned away every lingering trace of love, pity, and hesitation left inside my heart. They called me a nobody. They thought I was weak, uneducated, and helpless. They were planning to steal my youth, cast me aside like garbage, and build their fortune on my silence. I took a deep, steadying breath. I raised my bandaged left hand and touched the small silver locket around my neck. the locket my father had given me before he passed away. Inside it was a tiny key to his old metal storage trunk in our basement. "You want the Oak Ridge land, Mark?" I whispered into the quiet dark of the conservatory, a cold, sharp smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "You want to build an empire with Mr. Sterling's money." They had no idea that the Oak Ridge land didn't belong to the city. It didn't belong to Vance Construction. And the simple girl they had just discarded was about to become their absolute worst nightmare. When you spend your entire life believing that quiet patience is a virtue, it takes a severe shock to realize that some people view your kindness as permission to walk all over you. But once you wake up from that delusion, you see the world with terrifying clarity. I drove home that night following Mark's luxury car. He thought I was trailing behind him like a beaten puppy, broken and humiliated. He had no idea that every second I stared at his red taillights, my mind was operating like a cold, calculating machine. When we reached our house, Mark went straight upstairs to sleep, humming a cheerful tune to himself. He was already celebrating his bright future as a wealthy partner in Vance Construction, envisioning a life with Victoria Sterling and millions in the bank. I waited until I heard his steady, heavy breathing echoing from the master bedroom. At 1:30 a.m., I walked down the narrow wooden stairs into our cold, concrete basement. I flipped on the single overhead bulb, illuminating the dusty shelves filled with old boxes, holiday decorations, and forgotten furniture. In the far corner sat my father's heavy iron storage trunk, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. I reached up, opened my silver locket, and pulled out the small brass key. My hand didn't shake as I inserted it into the rusted padlock. The metal gave a sharp, heavy click, and the lid swung open. Inside lay my father's life's work. My father, Arthur, had been a master archivist. For 40 years, his job was to digitize, verify, and preserve the oldest property titles, land grants, and municipal records in the state. He possessed a legendary memory for historical survey lines. Before he died 3 years ago, he had warned me about the massive corporate land grabs happening across our expanding city. I began going through his neatly organized leather-bound journals, my left hand carefully turning the yellowed pages. I was looking for one specific section, the Historical Sector 7 survey, commonly known today as the Oak Ridge Commercial Zone. For 6 months, Mark and his boss at Vance Construction had been boasting about securing the rights to develop the Oak Ridge land. They claimed they were purchasing 60 acres of prime real estate from a private holding company called Apex Crest Properties. They had convinced Mr. Sterling's investment bank to release a $30 million development loan based on this property. I flipped through my father's notes until I found a heavy, folded parchment document stamped with a faded red wax seal from 1912. Attached to it was my father's handwritten legal analysis, complete with official court stamps, historical land surveys, and certified state registry deeds. As I read through the document, my breath caught in my throat. Apex Crest Properties didn't own the Oak Ridge land. In fact, Apex Crest was a fraudulent shell company created 20 years ago during a corrupt municipal land deal. The original 1912 land grant, known as the Kingsbury Trust Covenant, explicitly stated that the entire 60 acres of the Oak Ridge territory was bound under an indivisible, perpetual land trust. According to the legal terms of the covenant, the land could never be sold, mortgaged, or developed by any commercial entity without the unanimous, written consent of the sole living beneficiary of the Kingsbury Trust. And who was the sole living beneficiary? My father had spent the last 5 years of his life tracking down the bloodline of the original Kingsbury family. He had discovered that the last surviving direct descendant of the trust was his own mother, my grandmother. When she passed away, the legal rights of the Kingsbury Trust were quietly, legally transferred to her only direct living heir, me. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the basement, holding the 1912 original deed in my left hand, staring at my own name listed as the primary title conservator on the certified state registry document. I held undisputed legal title to the 60 acres of land Mark was trying to sell. Vance Construction had spent $20 million buying fraudulent papers from a fake shell company. Mark had spent 6 months pitching this project to Mr. Sterling. They were preparing to break ground in less than 2 weeks, using $30 million of borrowed bank capital to build a luxury commercial plaza on. They had no legal right to touch. If Vance Construction tried to break ground on that land without my permission, every dollar they spent would be illegal. Every contract they signed would be void. Every loan they secured from Sterling Capital would instantly default. exposing them to massive corporate fraud charges. Mark and his mother thought I was a poor, helpless nobody with no money to hire a lawyer. They had no idea that I didn't need a lawyer to fight them in court. I owned the very ground they were standing on. I carefully placed the historical covenant, the certified state surveys, and my father's legal research into a waterproof leather folder. I locked the iron trunk, turned off the basement light, and walked upstairs. I stood at the doorway of our bedroom, looking at Mark sleeping peacefully in his bed. He looked so confident, so comfortable in his belief that he had successfully outmaneuvered his quiet, broken wife. "You gave me $30,000 worth of value in your mind, Mark," I whispered silently into the dark room. "You laughed at my pain while I was bleeding in a hospital bed. You planned to throw me out like trash." I didn't wake him up. I didn't scream at him. Instead, I walked down to the guest room, sat at the small desk, and pulled out my phone. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed someone who understood high-stakes corporate law, someone who wasn't afraid of Eleanor's connections or Mr. Sterling's billions. I dialed a private number I found in my father's address book. The number belonged to Evelyn Vance, Blackwood, no relation to Mark's family, a legendary high-court corporate litigator who had been a close personal friend of my father before he retired. Evelyn was known throughout the state as an absolute shark in commercial real estate law. The phone rang 3 times before a sharp, poised female voice answered. "Evelyn Blackwood speaking." "Ms. Blackwood," I said, my voice steady, calm, and crystal clear. "My name is Hannah. I am Arthur's daughter." There was a sudden pause on the other end of the line. "Hannah." Evelyn's tone instantly softened, replacing her cold professional edge with genuine warmth. "Arthur's little girl. My dear, it has been years. How are you? I was so sorry to hear about your father's passing." "Thank you, Ms. Blackwood," I said softly. "I'm calling you tonight because my father left me his complete historical research archives, and right now, I am holding the original 1912 Kingsbury Trust Covenant for Sector 7. Silence stretched across the line for 5 full seconds. "The Oak Ridge territory?" Evelyn asked, her voice turning razor sharp. "The land Vance Construction and Sterling Capital have been boasting about in the business papers all month." "Yes," I replied. "Vance Construction is preparing to sign a $30 million development agreement with Sterling Capital in 10 days. My husband, Mark, is the lead project manager. He and his mother have just informed me that they plan to divorce me and leave me with nothing once the deal closes." I heard the sound of a pen tapping against a wooden desk on Evelyn's end. "They bought fraudulent title papers from Apex Crest, didn't they?" Evelyn asked, a cold, dangerous chuckle escaping her lips. "Those arrogant fools. They never did a deep title audit. They thought because the land was sitting quiet for 50 years, nobody held the master covenant." "I hold the master covenant, Miss Blackwood," I said. "And I want to know what options I have." "Options, my dear." Evelyn laughed, a sharp, triumphant sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't just have options, Hannah. You have total control. If what you're holding is the certified 1912 covenant, Vance Construction has committed one of the largest corporate title frauds in the history of this state. If we execute this correctly, we won't just stop their project. We will completely dismantle their company, live in front of their biggest financial backers." "What do I need to do?" I asked. "For the next 10 days, Hannah, you do absolutely nothing," Evelyn commanded firmly. "You play the quiet, broken, injured wife. You let Mark believe he has won. You let Eleanor insult you. You let them organize their grand groundbreaking ceremony at the Oak Ridge site. Let them invite the press, the mayor, the city council, and Mr. Sterling's entire executive board." Evelyn paused, her voice dripping with lethal anticipation. "And on the day of the ceremony, when Mark steps up to the microphone to celebrate his $30 million triumph, you and I will walk onto that stage with a federal court enforcement order." I closed my eyes, feeling a profound wave of peace wash over my chest. "I'll see you tomorrow morning in your office, Ms. Blackwood," I said. "Bring the leather folder, Hannah," Evelyn said quietly. "It's time to teach Mark and his family what happens when you build an empire on a foundation of cruel lies. To pull down people who believe they are untouchable, you must first become invisible. You must feed their arrogance until they become completely blind to the world around them." For the next 12 days, I became the absolute perfect, submissive, broken wife Mark and his mother expected me to be. Every morning, despite the throbbing ache in my cast, I woke up at 6:00 a.m. I made Mark's favorite breakfast, pressed his expensive suits, and handed him his leather briefcase with a quiet, humble smile. When Eleanor called me on the phone to demand that I organize the guest list invoices and catering receipts for the upcoming Oak Ridge groundbreaking gala, I answered in a soft, obedient tone, of course, Eleanor. I will take care of it right away. They mistook my complete composure for a defeated spirit. To Eleanor and Chloe, my quietness meant that I had accepted my place as the discarded, low-class servant. They believed I was too broken by my accident to fight back, too uneducated to understand corporate business, and too poor to hire a legal team. Arrogance is a powerful drug. It makes clever people profoundly blind. While Mark spent his days boasting at his office about his upcoming promotion to partner, I spent my afternoons sitting in Evelyn Blackwood's high-rise legal office downtown. Evelyn worked with terrifying precision. She mobilized a private team of retired judicial auditors, certified state land surveyors, and financial investigators. Within 1 week, Evelyn's team uncovered the complete paper trail of Vance Construction's fraud. Arthur Vance, Mark's father and the founder of Vance Construction, had paid a bribe of $200,000 to an obscure municipal clerk 15 years ago to create a fake transfer record for Sector 7 under the shell name Apex Crest Properties. They had been holding on to those fake papers, waiting for the city's expansion to reach the Oak Ridge area, so they could sell the land to institutional developers like Sterling Capital. Mark wasn't just an innocent project manager. He was actively involved in covering up the missing original title documents to speed up Mr. Sterling's $30 million loan payout. It's a criminal conspiracy, Hannah, Evelyn explained one afternoon, throwing a stack of audited financial records onto her glass desk. Vance Construction is using Mr. Sterling's money to pay off their old corporate debts. They don't even have the liquid capital to cover the construction costs. They are gambling everything on this one project. If this land deal fails, Vance Construction will be instantly insolvent. And Mark's divorce papers? I asked calmly. Evelyn smirked, pulling a sleek pen from her pocket. His lawyer sent a draft to my office yesterday, assuming I was just a court-appointed public representative. Mark is offering you $30,000 and demanding you vacate your house within 14 days of the groundbreaking ceremony. He explicitly cited irreconcilable differences and claimed you contributed nothing to his marital assets. Signed nothing yet, I said. Of course not. Evelyn smiled, her eyes sharp. We will hand him our response in front of the live news cameras at the Oak Ridge site. 4 days before the grand ceremony, Mark came home late. He walked into our bedroom, tossed his coat onto a chair, and sat on the edge of the bed without looking at me. I was sitting at my small vanity table, carefully unwrapping the light bandage from my wrist. Hannah, Mark said, his voice flat, emotionless, and cold. We need to finalize our arrangements. I turned around slowly to face him. What arrangements? Mark. He pulled a thin white envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the nightstand between us. I think it's time we go our separate ways, he said, speaking as if he were reading a routine business email. My role at Vance Construction is expanding, with the Oak Ridge project closing this week. My social life and my career are moving into a completely different tier. Frankly, we belong to different worlds now. I looked at the white envelope, then raised my eyes to meet his. Different worlds, Mark. I asked softly. Does that new world include Victoria Sterling? Mark's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't even have the decency to blush or look ashamed. He shrugged his shoulders with cold indifference. Victoria understands the demands of my position, Hannah, he said, looking past me at the wall. Her family is backing my career. She fits into the future my mother and I have spent years building. You were part of my past. I'm being generous here. I've included a $30,000 settlement check in that envelope. If you sign the uncontested separation agreement before Friday, I'll even let you keep your old sedan. $30,000. For 6 years of my life. 6 years of cooking, cleaning, enduring his mother's psychological abuse, and supporting him while he built his career. He was offering me pocket change to clear his path so he could marry a billionaire's daughter. And what if I refused to sign before Friday? I asked, keeping my tone completely neutral. Mark let out a bitter, mocking laugh. He stood up, towering over me, looking down at me with the exact same cold contempt his mother had refined over decades. Refuse? Mark sneered, leaning in close. With what money, Hannah? What lawyers are you going to hire? My mother sits on the charity boards with the city's top judges. My father's company controls millions in local contracts. If you try to make this ugly, our legal team will tie you up in court until you don't have a single penny left to buy food. Sign the papers, take the 30 grand, and walk away quietly while you still have some dignity left. I looked at my husband, the man I had once loved so deeply that I would have sacrificed my own happiness for his, and realized there was nothing left of him worth saving. He was completely hollowed out by greed. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll make my decision by the day of the groundbreaking ceremony. Good. Mark smirked, grabbing his car keys from the dresser. Smart girl. I'm staying at my mother's estate tonight to finalize the guest seating. Don't wait up. He turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the bedroom door so hard the glass in the windows rattled. The moment his car engine revved down the driveway, I pulled out my phone and called Evelyn. Evelyn, I said into the receiver, my voice dead calm. He just gave me the $30,000 divorce ultimatum. Excellent, Evelyn replied from her office, the sound of legal papers shuffling in the background. That establishes clear malice and intent of marital abandonment right before commercial asset realization. The Superior Court judge has just signed the emergency injunction. The state marshals are briefed. What time do we move on Friday? I ask. The Oak Ridge ceremony begins at 10:00 a.m., Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a low, lethal purr. Arthur Vance and Mark will finish their opening speech at 10:15 a.m. That is when we step onto the stage. I'll be ready, Evelyn, I said. And I'll be wearing my best dress. That night, I slept better than I had in 6 years. I didn't sleep out of fear or anxiety. I slept out of peaceful, absolute anticipation. Mark and his family had spent years treating me like a ghost in their house. They had mocked my late father's memory, insulted my dignity, and plotted to throw me out onto the street the second they tasted real wealth. They believed Friday morning was going to be the crowning moment of the Vance family legacy. They had no idea it was going to be the day the entire city watched them fall to their knees. Friday morning arrived under a crisp, bright autumn sky. The 60-acre undeveloped field of Sector 7, the Oak Ridge site, had been transformed into an extravagant, high-society event venue. A massive, snow-white marquee tent stood near the center of the field, decorated with silk banners, massive flower arrangements, and high-tech display screens showing digital renderings of the proposed Oak Ridge luxury commercial plaza. Over 400 prominent guests had gathered under the tent. Long lines of luxury sit-ins and sports cars were parked along the gravel driveway, managed by a team of valet drivers in black vests. Waiters walked through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and gourmet appetizers. 2 broadcast trucks from major regional news networks were parked nearby, their satellite dishes pointed skyward to broadcast the groundbreaking live across the state. Vance Construction had spent over $100,000 on PR alone, ensuring that every business outlet covered their historic $30 million development. In the front row under the marquee sat the city's elite, the mayor, 2 state representatives, the district banking commissioner, and the entire executive board of Sterling Capital, led by Richard Sterling himself. Standing near the main stage, looking like royalty, was the Vance family. Arthur Vance, the founder of the firm, wore an expensive navy bespoke suit, holding a silver-plated shovel tied with a thick red silk ribbon. Beside him stood Eleanor, wearing an extravagant cream-colored designer dress and a diamond necklace that sparkled under the stage lights. Chloe stood nearby, taking selfies with Victoria Sterling, who was dressed in an Italian silk outfit. And right in the center of it all was Mark. He was beaming with supreme confidence, shaking hands with city officials, smiling broadly for the news photographers, his arm wrapped comfortably around Victoria's waist whenever the cameras flashed. They were radiant with the sickening arrogance of people who truly believed they owned the world and everyone in it. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, asking the distinguished audience to take their seats. The crowd clapped warmly as Arthur Vance and Mark stepped up onto the raised wooden platform. Standing behind a crystal podium bearing the Vance Construction logo, Arthur Vance leaned into the microphone, his deep, practiced voice booming across the loudspeakers. Distinguished guests, leaders of our great city, and honored partners, Arthur began spreading his arms wide. Today, we stand on the threshold of history. For over 50 years, this 60-acre parcel of land sat quiet, a forgotten, unused field in the heart of our growing municipality. But where others saw empty dirt, Vance Construction saw vision, progress, and economic triumph. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause, Eleanor dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking proudly at her husband and son. Chloe cheered loudly from the second row. Today, Arthur continued, his voice rising dramatically. Backed by the generous financial partnership of Sterling Capital and the tireless work of my son, Mark Vance, we officially claim this land for our $30 million Oak Ridge Revival project. More applause echoed under the giant tent. Mark stepped forward, taking his turn at the microphone, adjusting his silk tie with a triumphant smile. This project, Mark declared, leaning into the mic, represents the power of vision and pedigree. It proves that when you possess the right leadership, the right capital, and the courage to build, no obstacle can stand in your way. Today, Vance Construction officially breaks ground. Mark raised his right hand, signaling for his staff to bring forward the silver-plated shovel for the ceremonial ribbon cutting. Right as his fingers touched the polished silver handle of the shovel, a heavy silence suddenly rolled through the rear of the marquee tent. A sleek black town car pulled directly off the gravel road, driving straight up the center grass aisle of the event space, stopping less than 20 feet from the edge of the main stage. The crowd began turning around in confusion. Whispers rippled through the audience. The news camera operators instinctively turned their heavy lenses away from Mark and pointed them straight at the car. The rear doors opened. Stepping out from the left side was Evelyn Blackwood, wearing a sharp, tailored black court suit, carrying a heavy leather legal briefcase. And stepping out right behind her was me. I was wearing an elegant, fitted charcoal gray dress. My hair was styled neatly, my posture was perfectly straight, and my broken right arm rested calmly in a sleek black sling. In my left hand, I held a thick, red-stamped judicial folder. Walking beside us were two uniformed state marshals and the chief administrative registrar for the district land court. A sudden, suffocating hush fell over the 400 guests. The background music stopped. Eleanor's jaw dropped. She stared at me from the front row, as if she were looking at an insane ghost. Chloe's smile completely vanished, her phone slipping slightly in her hand. Mark stood frozen on the stage, his hand still gripping the silver shovel, his face turning an ash-gray color in seconds. Hannah! Mark's shocked voice echoed loudly through the podium microphone, picked up by the live broadcast feeds. What are you doing here? I told you to stay at home. Arthur Vance glared at me from behind the podium, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He slammed his hand onto the crystal stand, shouting angrily into the mic, "Security, remove these people immediately!" Arthur demanded, pointing a thick finger at us. "This is a private corporate event." Before the private security guards could move an inch, the two state marshals stepped forward, pulling their official badges and displaying them high for the crowd and news cameras to see. "Stand down," the lead marshal ordered in a loud, booming voice that carried across the entire tent. "This judicial writ is issued directly by the chief administrative judge of the state superior court. Anyone attempting to interfere with the execution of this court order will be placed under immediate federal arrest for obstruction of justice." The private security guards froze in their tracks, stepping back instantly. Evelyn Blackwood stepped smoothly onto the raised wooden stage, pulling a heavy, red-sealed legal document from her briefcase. She handed it directly to the chief registrar, who stepped up to the podium microphone, gently pushing Mark aside. "Under Superior Court Order 88C, the chief registrar announced, his voice echoing clearly into the live news microphones, all development activities, financial transactions, land transfers, and corporate operations associated with Sector 7, known as the Oak Ridge Project, are hereby immandiatl frozen." A collective gasp exploded through the crowd. Reporters began shouting questions as camera shutters clicked frantically like a swarm of insects. "What is the meaning of this madness?" Arthur Vance roared, his voice shaking with furious rage as he grabbed the edge of the podium. "My company holds a valid commercial title from Apex Crest Properties. We have invested $20 million of private capital into this land." Evelyn Blackwood took a slow step forward, looking Arthur Vance and Mark straight in the eyes with absolute, lethal authority. "Mr. Vance," Evelyn stated clearly, her voice effortlessly reaching every corner of the tent. "Apex Crest Properties was an illegal shell corporation, created through municipal forgery 15 years ago. They never possessed legal title to this ground. The original 1912 Kingsbury Trust Covenant explicitly restricts all property transfers strictly through direct maternal bloodline succession." Evelyn turned toward me, extending her hand with deep professional respect. "The sole living heir, sole legal conservator, and absolute title holder of the entire 60 Acre Oak Ridge Estate, is Mrs. Hannah Vance. The entire marquee tent erupted into complete, uncontrollable chaos. If you have ever seen a massive glass building shatter all at once, you know that the sound of the collapse is immediate and horrifying. That was exactly what happened inside that white marquee tent. Richard Sterling, the billionaire chairman of Sterling Capital, instantly stood up from his front row seat. His face was twisted in shock and fury as he looked at the news cameras recording his bank's logo right next to a fraud freeze. "Arthur!" Richard Sterling shouted, his booming voice cutting through the noise of the panic as he pointed a trembling finger at Arthur Vance. "What is the meaning of this? Did you secure a $30 million credit line from my bank using forged title papers?" "Richard, please, listen to me," Arthur stammered, his polished, confident persona completely shattering into frantic panic. "It's a mistake, a legal technicality. She's my daughter-in-law. She's a nobody. She has no money." "Silence," the Lyd State Marshal commanded, stepping between Arthur and the podium. Mark stood on the wooden platform, sweating profusely, his expensive suit now looking ridiculously out of place. He stared down at me with frantic, terrified eyes, his hands shaking so violently he dropped the silver shovel. It fell onto the wooden floorboards with a loud, metallic selang that echoed through the microphone. Mark rushed to the edge of the stage, leaning over, his voice cracking into a desperate sobbing pitch. "Hannah! Please!" Mark cried out, his voice picked up by the news mics. "What are you doing to my family? We're married. We can talk about this at home. Whatever you want, we can work it out. Please, don't do this here." I took a slow, deliberate step forward until I stood right at the base of the stage, looking up at the man who had left me bleeding in an emergency room 12 days ago. I reached into my charcoal, gray handbag, pulled out the thin white envelope he had set on my nightstand 4 nights ago, and held it up high so every broadcast camera could zoom in on it. "4 days ago, Mark," I said, my voice quiet, clear, and perfectly captured by the news microphones, "you handed me this envelope. You offered me $30,000 to walk away quietly because your family decided I lacked the pedigree to exist in your world." I let go of the envelope. It fluttered through the air and landed face up on the grass right at Mark's feet. "You told me I was weak, Mark," I continued, looking past him to Eleanor, who was leaning against her daughter Chloe, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. "You told me I was uneducated and helpless. You left me in a hospital room because you were too busy celebrating money you stole from a dead man's trust." The crowd gasped loudly. Several reporters began furiously scribbling in their notebooks, while cameramen moved closer to capture Eleanor's pale, horrified face. "Hannah, please!" Eleanor suddenly shrieked, taking a desperate step toward the stage, her high society mask completely gone. "You can't do this to us! We're your family! Think of Mark's career! Think of our reputation." I turned my head slowly and looked Eleanor directly in the eyes. "Family, Eleanor," I asked, my tone as cold as winter ice. "Family doesn't laugh over the phone while their son's wife is lying in an emergency room. Family doesn't treat people like unpaid domestic servants because they didn't inherit millions." I turned back to the chief registrar and Evelyn Blackwood. "Ms. Blackwood, please execute the judicial freeze." Evelyn nodded. She handed a heavy stack of federal injunction papers to the chief registrar, who immediately served them on to Arthur Vance and Mark right there on the live stage. "Arthur Vance, Mark Vance," the chief registrar declared formally, "you are hereby served with an emergency federal injunction for commercial title fraud, fraudulent representation of assets, and institutional defraudment of lenders. All corporate accounts of Vance Construction are frozen pending grand jury indictment. Clear the stage immediately." Richard Sterling didn't wait another second. He turned around, facing his executive team, his face dark with rage. "Cancel the loan?" Richard roared to his chief financial officer. "Pull every dollar from Vance Construction accounts immediately. Freeze their credit lines and file an emergency asset seizure writ with the district attorney." Victoria Sterling looked at Mark with absolute disgust. She stepped back from him as if he were covered in filth, taking her father's arm and walking away toward their limousine without saying a single word to Mark. "Victoria, wait!" Mark screamed from the stage, taking a step forward, but a state marshal put a heavy hand on his chest, pushing him back. "Stay where you are, sir," the marshal ordered sternly. The 400 high society guests began scrambling toward the exit, trying to distance themselves from the disgraced Vance family before the news crews could interview them. The champagne glasses were abandoned on silver trays, The silk banners flapped uselessly in the wind, and the $30 million dream vanished into dust in less than 15 minutes. Mark sank to his knees on the wooden stage floor, right beside the silver shovel he had dropped. He buried his face in his hands, weeping openly as the cameras continued to flash. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I simply stood there, watching the complete, absolute destruction of the people who had built their lives on cruelty and lies. I turned around slowly, took Evelyn's arm, and walked down the center aisle through the sea of flashing news cameras, not as the quiet, forgotten daughter-in-law, but as the sole, undisputed owner of everything they had tried to steal. When an empire built on lies finally collapses, it doesn't fall gracefully. It crashes with a violent, terrifying weight that crushes everyone who stood inside its walls. The footage of Mark weeping on his knees, Arthur Vance being served with federal injunction papers, and Eleanor covering her face with her designer purse went viral within hours. By Friday evening, every major television news station across the country was airing the clip under headline banners that read Tish Iris Mel Eum. Del Erland for ADUSCSO CTU XOCD. The financial fallout for the Vance family was instant, brutal, and total. On Monday morning, Sterling Capital filed an emergency lawsuit against Vance Construction, demanding the immediate repayment of $20 million in preliminary development advances. Because Vance Construction had already spent most of that money paying off old corporate debts and funding their extravagant lifestyle, they had no cash to return. The district attorney's office opened a formal criminal investigation into corporate forgery, bank fraud, and municipal bribery. Federal agents executed a search warrant on Vance Construction's downtown headquarters, seizing boxes of financial records, hard drives, and legal documents. Arthur Vance's name was stripped from every civic board in the city. The mayor publicly canceled all municipal contracts with the firm. Within 7 days of the groundbreaking disaster, Vance Construction officially declared bankruptcy. Then came the personal betrayals, the exact kind of cruelty the Vances had so casually inflicted on others. Victoria Sterling didn't answer a single one of Mark's desperate phone calls. Her father's legal team issued a formal public statement declaring that Victoria had never been engaged to Mark, and that Sterling Capital was a victim of Vance Construction's elaborate criminal scheme. Eleanor's wealthy high society friends vanished overnight. The women who had attended her tea parties and praised her grand mansion stopped taking her calls. The charity boards she had served on quietly voted to remove her from her leadership positions to protect their own reputations. 2 weeks after the groundbreaking event, I was sitting in Evelyn Blackwood's office when the final civil settlement hearing took place. Mark, Arthur, and Eleanor sat on the opposite side of the long mahogany conference table. The change in their appearance was shocking. Arthur Vance looked 15 years older. His sharp tailored suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting jacket. His hands trembled as he stared at his lap. Eleanor sat in the corner, her expensive jewelry replaced by plain clothes, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. And Mark looked like a broken shell. He had lost weight, dark circles hollowed his eyes, and he couldn't bring himself to look me in the face. Their corporate lawyer, a tired man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, cleared his throat and addressed Evelyn. "Ms. Blackwood," the lawyer said softly, "my clients have surrendered all claims to Sector 7. Vance Construction has entered Chapter 7 liquidation. We are here today to request that your client, Mrs. Hannah Vance, consider waiving personal civil damages against Mark Vance so he can avoid total personal bankruptcy." Evelyn didn't even look up from her legal file. "Waiving civil damages?" Evelyn asked, a cold, mocking tone in her voice. "4 weeks ago, Mark Vance offered my client $30,000 to walk away from a 6-year marriage while he attempted to steal her 60-acre inheritance. He told her she was weak, uneducated, and helpless." Evelyn slid a document across the table. "My client is executing her right under state law to claim full marital asset division. We are seizing Mark Vance's share of the suburban home, his corporate vehicle, and his personal investment accounts to satisfy the unpaid land trespass damages." Mark suddenly let out a strangled gasp. He slammed his hands onto the table, leaning forward, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "Hannah, please," Mark cried out, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Please, look at me. I know I was wrong. I know I treated you terribly. My mother, my father, they pushed me. They made me believe that money and status were the only things that mattered. I was stupid. I was blind." He pushed his chair back and stumbled around the table, dropping directly to his knees beside my chair. He tried to reach out and grab my left hand, but Evelyn instantly stepped between us. "Keep your distance, Mr. Vance," Evelyn warned sternly. Mark stayed on his knees on the carpet, looking up at me with bloodshot, weeping eyes. "Hannah, please," he sobbed, begging like a child. "Don't destroy my life completely. I loved you. I still love you. We can leave this city. We can sell whatever is left, buy a tiny house in the countryside, and start over. Just like we used to be when we first met." I looked down at my husband, the man who had stood by silently while his mother called me a servant, the man who had abandoned me in an emergency room, the man who had laughed at my broken body. I felt no anger. I felt no burning hatred. I felt no urge to yell or gloat over his defeat. All I felt was a deep, profound, and peaceful emptiness. "You can't go back, Mark," I said, my voice steady, soft, and calm. "You didn't make a mistake because your parents pushed you. You showed me exactly who you were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. You loved the idea of money, status, and power. You never loved me." I stood up from my chair, holding my leather folder under my arm. "I signed the divorce papers this morning, Mark," I added softly. "You keep the $30,000 you offered me. You're going to need it." I turned away and walked out of the conference room, leaving Mark weeping on the floor, while his mother stared at the wall in silent, total ruin. When the dust of a great battle finally settles, the silence that follows is no longer suffocating. It is clean, quiet, and peaceful. In the months that followed the trial, the Vance family's world completely dismantled. Arthur Vance received a 3-year suspended sentence and massive financial restitution penalties that wiped out his remaining personal savings. He was forced to put his grand mansion up for public auction to pay off Vance Construction's defaulted debts. The proud man who had once treated city officials like his personal servants was reduced to living in a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. Eleanor, unable to face the social humiliation of her complete downfall, fled the city entirely. She moved to a small, isolated rural town where no one knew her name or her past, living on a modest state pension, completely cut off from the high society circles that had once been her entire life. And Mark lost his professional license to practice project management due to his involvement in the land fraud scheme. With his reputation destroyed and his assets seized, no corporate firm in the state would hire him. He ended up taking an entry-level night shift job at a commercial warehousing facility, earning a modest hourly wage just to pay his monthly rent. As for Sector 7, the 60-acre Oak Ridge land, dozens of wealthy commercial real estate developers approached me over the next 6 months. They offered me tens of millions of dollars to buy the land so they could build luxury shopping malls, high-rise apartments, and private resorts. I turned every single one of them down. Money had brought nothing but greed, arrogance, and destruction to the Vance family. I had no desire to let that same greed pollute my family's legacy. Instead, I used my position as the sole conservator of the Kingsbury Trust to partner with the city's Historical Preservation Society, the local botanical registry, and state environmental groups. Together, we established the Kingsbury Historical Nature Sanctuary and Cultural Center. We preserved the pristine forest, planted thousands of native oak trees, restored the historic 1912 survey trails, and built a state-of-the-art public library and archival research center on the property. The sanctuary was open to the entire city as a free public park, a place where families could walk under the green canopy, where students could study history, and where low-income community groups could hold gatherings without ever paying a single dime. I took up an office in the newly constructed research center, serving as the full-time executive director of the foundation. I lived comfortably, quietly, and completely on my own terms, surrounded by books, history, and the peaceful beauty of nature. My father's lifelong dream, to protect the history and truth of our city for future generations, was finally, permanently realized. One golden autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after the groundbreaking disaster, I was walking along the stone pathways of the Kingsbury Sanctuary, holding a cup of warm tea, inspecting the newly planted saplings near the main public entrance gates. A public transit bus pulled up to the stop across the road. Stepping off the bus, holding a worn canvas bag and wearing a simple, faded work jacket, was Mark. He had come to the sanctuary on his lunch break from the warehouse across town. He didn't see me standing under the trees at first. He walked slowly over to a wooden bench near the memorial fountain, the exact spot where he had once dropped his silver-plated shovel, and sat down with a paper bag containing a simple sandwich. He looked around at the families laughing on the open lawns, the children feeding ducks by the pond, and the large bronze plaque mounted near the entrance archway. The plaque read, TX Bjora Sans Tuarwa, dedicated to the memory of Arthur, a quiet seeker of truth. Gifted to the citizens of this city by Hannah Kingsbury. Truth is not inherited through wealth. It is honored through integrity. As Mark read those words, he bowed his head. I saw his shoulders shake slightly as he wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his faded jacket. Taking a small, quiet bite of his lunch, he looked completely lost, sitting in the shadow of the magnificent life he could have shared with me if he had only chosen honesty over greed. I stood under the golden autumn leaves, watching him from 50 yards away. I felt no desire to walk over to him. I felt no need to remind him of his failures or gloat over his struggle. The pain he had caused me had long since healed, leaving behind only a quiet, peaceful strength. I took a sip of my warm tea, pulled my coat slightly tighter against the autumn breeze, turned back toward the library, and walked into the bright, warm sunlight of my new life. When people look at stories of betrayal and revenge, they often focus on the drama of the collapse, the dramatic court injunctions, the public humiliations, and the sudden fall of high and mighty empires. But the true lesson of this story does not lie in the destruction of the Vance family. It lies in the quiet power of human dignity. In our modern world, we are constantly told that power belongs to those who shout the loudest, those who wear the most expensive clothes, and those who accumulate the largest bank accounts. We are taught to measure people by their titles, their cars, and their ability to dominate others. Eleanor, Arthur, and Mark Vance lived by that false creed. They believed that because I was quiet, I was weak. They believed that because my father was a humble archivist, our family was worthless. They assumed that my silence while serving them tea was proof that I had accepted my place at their feet. They forgot a fundamental truth about human nature: silence is not submission. Sometimes silence is simply the quiet patience of a person who knows the truth and is waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak for itself. A storm does not announce its arrival with thunder alone. It gathers quietly in the sky long before the rain begins to fall. When you build your life on arrogance, greed, and the cruel habit of stepping on others to raise yourself up, you are not building an empire. You are building a palace on a foundation of loose sand. It may look grand for a season. It may impress your wealthy friends, and it may make you feel untouchable. But the moment the wind of truth blows, the entire structure will crumble under its own dishonest weight. If you are currently going through a dark season in your life, if you are dealing with arrogant in-laws who look down on you, a partner who takes your kindness for granted, or people who use your humble background to make you feel small, I want you to remember these 3 principles first. Never sacrifice your dignity to keep a seat at a table where you are not respected. You do not need to prove your worth to people who evaluate humanity based on price tags. Second, do not react with reckless anger. When people mistreat you, their cruelty is a reflection of their character, not yours. Anger blinds you, but quiet, cold clarity allows you to see every move on the board. Protect your truth, gather your facts, and let justice take its course. And third, remember that true victory is not about destroying your enemies. It is about rebuilding your life into something so clean, peaceful, and beautiful that their bitterness can never touch you again. The Vance family lost their wealth, their company, and their standing because they traded their integrity for short-term greed. I gained my freedom, my father's legacy, and a peaceful future because I refused to let their cruelty change who I was. In the end, life has a way of balancing every account, down to the very last cent. You do not need to fight dirty to win. You simply need to stand firm in the light of truth. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this full story today on Revolt. Every week, we bring you powerful, cinematic stories of resilience, justice, emotional comebacks, and the ultimate triumph of truth over betrayal. If Hannah's story inspired you today, please take a quick second to hit the like button on this video. It helps our channel reach more people around the world who might be going through their own difficult seasons and need a reminder that strength and dignity will always prevail. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. What moment in Hannah's journey touched your heart the most? What would you have done if you found out your partner was planning a betrayal behind your back? Drop your thoughts below. We read and reply to as many comments as we can. Don't forget to subscribe to Revolt and click the notification bell so you never miss another high-stakes, emotional storytelling release. Share this video with a friend, a family member, or anyone who loves a powerful, satisfying story of justice. Until next time, remember, never bow your head to cruelty. Protect your integrity, stand tall in your truth, and remember that the greatest comeback is becoming completely unstoppable. Thank you for watching, stay strong, and we will see you in the next story.